The pen shook in his hand. He hated himself for it. Contracts were supposed to be steady, official, ironclad. But tonight, with his name about to bind him to a man he barely knew, his fingers betrayed every ounce of the storm raging inside him. "You're trembling," the man across from him murmured, his voice low, unyielding yet strangely tender. Ethan lifted his eyes, meeting those of Adrian Hale, the last person he ever expected to marry. Adrian's gaze was like New York's skyline at midnight. Cold steel and burning light, dangerous but impossible to look away from. For a moment, Ethan thought of bolting. He thought of tearing up the contract, of running barefoot into the streets until the city swallowed him whole. But Adrian leaned forward, his breath brushing against Ethan's ear, and whispered, almost conspiratorial, "Don't tremble. I'll be gentle." The words twisted something inside him. They weren't meant for reassurance. They were a warning dressed in velvet. It hadn't started like this. Ethan Price was supposed to be a man of control. Fresh out of Columbia law, he had clawed his way through internships, brutal nights buried in casework, and the gnawing loneliness of a life that felt perpetually borrowed. He was a survivor, yes, but survival had never left room for softness. Not until the deal. Not until Adrian. The marriage contract was more than a signature on paper. It was currency, leverage, a lifeline. Adrian Hale was heir to Hale Enterprises, a ruthless empire dressed up as philanthropy. His father's empire was built on blood, negotiations, and the kind of power that turned people into pawns. And Ethan? He was a pawn too, except tonight he had been chosen for something different. To become Adrian's legal spouse. It was supposed to be temporary. A business move. An arrangement to protect Adrian's standing in the boardroom wars tearing Hale Enterprises apart. Love wasn't part of it. Neither was vulnerability. And yet, as Ethan looked at Adrian across the mahogany table, his heart raced in ways he couldn't explain. "Sign it," Adrian said, sliding the contract toward him with the ease of a man accustomed to people bending to his will. Ethan hesitated, his pen hovering. "This feels insane. People don't just get married like this." Adrian smirked, leaning back, the silk of his tie catching the light. "In this city, people do worse for less." That was the thing about Adrian. He could be cruel and captivating in the same breath. And Ethan, against all logic, was drawn to that contradiction like a moth to flame. The papers rustled as Ethan finally pressed the pen down, his signature bleeding into permanence. When it was done, the silence in the room thickened. He expected Adrian to pour them both a drink, maybe flash that arrogant smile that never quite reached his eyes. Instead, Adrian stood, circled the table, and stopped behind Ethan's chair. His hand landed softly on Ethan's shoulder. Warm, steady, terrifying. "You did the right thing," Adrian said. His voice was velvet, but beneath it was steel. "And now you're mine." The first week of their marriage was nothing short of suffocating. Adrian was everywhere. His presence lingered in the penthouse apartment. Ethan had moved into the scent of his cologne in the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing across marble floors, the way his eyes followed Ethan like he was trying to decode him. They argued. God, they argued. About boundaries, about appearances, about the suffocating expectations of their contract. But in the quiet spaces between, something else brewed. Something neither of them had agreed to. The first time it happened was a Tuesday night. Ethan had just finished a grueling day at work, his tie loosened, exhaustion weighing heavy on him. He had walked into the apartment to find Adrian in the living room, shirt unbuttoned, sleeves rolled, a glass of bourbon in hand. "You look like hell," Adrian remarked without looking up from his tablet. Ethan rolled his eyes, tossing his bag down. "Good to know you're still as charming as ever." Adrian's lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile. And then, unexpected, Brutal said, "You work yourself to death, Ethan. For what? For people who don't care if you collapse tomorrow." It was the first time Adrian's words pierced past Ethan's defenses. The first time Ethan realized that beneath Adrian's arrogance was someone who saw too much. And it was the first time Adrian touched him without the weight of a contract hanging between them. a hand on his wrist. A whisper, low and close. "You don't have to prove yourself to me." Ethan should have pulled away. But he didn't. By the second month, the boundaries blurred. Their public life was all performance. Hand-holding at charity galas, kisses on cheeks under flashing cameras. The illusion of love crafted for shareholders and society pages. But in private, the performance cracked. In private, Adrian cooked Ethan breakfast on Sundays, his hair a mess, pancakes burning on the skillet. In private, Ethan stitched up Adrian's cut knuckle after a boardroom brawl turned physical, his hands shaking as Adrian's eyes softened. One night, when the city was drowning in rain, Adrian pulled Ethan into the warmth of his bed not because the contract demanded it, but because loneliness had finally broken them both down. "I don't know how to do this," Ethan whispered, his voice catching. Adrian's fingers traced the curve of his jaw, his thumb brushing against trembling lips. "Neither do I," he admitted, softer than Ethan had ever heard him. "But I'll try. With you." And for the first time since signing his name on that contract, Ethan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about survival anymore. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one brewing inside Ethan. Rain lashed against the towering glass windows of the penthouse, and thunder rolled across the skyline like a warning. He sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, his tie loosened, his shirt sticking slightly from the walk home. Adrian sat beside him, his glass of bourbon untouched, his presence both suffocating and strangely grounding. They hadn't spoken for almost 20 minutes. Silence had become its own language between them, one Ethan didn't yet know how to interpret. Sometimes it was heavy, suffocating. Other times it was the only thing that felt safe. Finally, Adrian spoke, voice low, almost swallowed by the rain. "You still don't trust me." Ethan's head turned, his brows knitting. "Should I?" The corner of Adrian's mouth twitched, not in amusement, but in something Ethan couldn't read. "No, probably not." The honesty cut sharper than a lie would have. Their marriage was a puzzle of contradictions. By day, Adrian Hale was ruthless, sharp-edged, the perfect heir to a dynasty that demanded blood as currency. In boardrooms, he was fire contained in glass, his smile sharper than any blade. Ethan had watched him reduce men twice his age to silence with nothing more than a look. By night, though, when the cameras were gone and the weight of the world pressed in, Adrian was something else. Quieter, more fragile. His silence was not always calculated, it was tired, worn, human. Ethan hated himself for noticing, for caring. The second month blurred into the third. The world still believed their marriage was nothing short of romantic destiny. Tabloids spun stories of their late-night strolls through Central Park, their whispered exchanges at charity events, their undeniable chemistry on red carpets. None of them knew the truth, that Ethan still woke up most mornings convinced he was living someone else's life, that Adrian sometimes slept on the couch, claiming work kept him up too late. And yet, the lie grew harder to maintain, because somewhere in the cracks, something real had begun to bloom. Like the night Adrian came home bruised. Ethan had been waiting, told himself it was because he couldn't sleep. But really, it was because Adrian hadn't come back yet, and the silence was unbearable. When the door finally opened, Adrian stumbled in, jacket torn, a split lip glistening under the light. "What the hell happened to you?" Ethan's voice came out sharper than intended. Adrian brushed him off. "Nothing, just business." "Business doesn't leave you bleeding, Adrian." Ethan caught his wrist before he could retreat, dragging him toward the kitchen. "Sit down." "I don't need." "Sit." Adrian did. For the first time, he looked less like the untouchable heir and more like a man who'd taken too many blows. Ethan rummaged for the first aid kit, his hands trembling as he dabbed at the cut on Adrian's lip. "You're terrible at this," Adrian muttered, wincing. "Shut up." Ethan shot back, more harshly than he meant. His chest ached at the sight of Adrian's blood. "You can face down billionaires but not let someone clean you up?" Adrian's eyes lifted, burning through him. "You care." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a dangerous one. Ethan froze, the antiseptic-soaked cotton hovering just above Adrian's skin. Don't twist this into something it's not. I'm not twisting anything. Adrian's voice was quiet, stripped of the arrogance that usually shielded him. I just noticed. And damn it all, Ethan wanted to deny it. He wanted to throw the kit across the room, storm off, remind both of them that this was a transaction. Nothing more. But he couldn't. Not when Adrian's eyes were searching his like that. Not when the truth weighed so heavy it nearly suffocated him. He pressed the cotton gently to Adrian's lip, his hand steady despite his racing heart. You're insufferable. Adrian smirked through the sting. And yet, you're here. The next weeks only tangled them further. Ethan began to notice things he wished he hadn't. The way Adrian's shoulders dropped when he thought no one was watching. The way his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest when he was trying not to show impatience. The rare, almost boyish laugh that slipped out when Ethan burned toast on Sunday mornings. He noticed, too, that Adrian noticed him. That he paid attention in ways that shouldn't matter but somehow did, remembering how Ethan liked his coffee, leaving space for Ethan's files on the desk they now shared, pulling Ethan into his side at public events with an ease that felt less like performance and more like instinct. It was terrifying, because the more Ethan saw Adrian as human, the harder it became to protect his own heart. It all came to a breaking point one evening in late spring. They had been invited to a gala downtown, another parade of wealthy smiles and clinking glasses. Ethan had worn the suit Adrian had picked out, deep navy that brought out the color of his eyes. The cameras had adored them, and Adrian, ever the actor, had played the perfect husband, his hand warm at the small of Ethan's back, his lips brushing Ethan's temple when the flashes got too aggressive. But when they returned home, Ethan felt like he couldn't breathe. He ripped the tie from his neck, tossing it on the couch, pacing the length of the living room like a caged animal. Adrian watched him from the doorway, loosening his own tie. What's wrong now? This? Ethan snapped, turning on him. All of this, pretending, performing, acting like we're some perfect love story for the world to eat up. Adrian's gaze darkened. That was the deal, Ethan. I know what the deal was. His voice cracked. But it doesn't feel like just a deal anymore. And that scares the hell out of me. The words hung in the air like a confession, raw and trembling. Adrian stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as though approaching something fragile. And what do you think it feels like for me? Ethan's throat went dry. I've lived my whole life with people who wanted something from me. Adrian continued, his voice low, steady. My name, my money, my power. And then you show up, with your stubbornness and your fire, and suddenly I can't tell what's real anymore either. Ethan's chest ached, his pulse hammering in his ears. Adrian. But Adrian didn't let him finish. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his hand cupping Ethan's face, his lips crashing against Ethan's with a force that stole the breath from his lungs. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was messy, desperate, like 2 people finally giving in after holding back too long. Ethan should have pushed him away. He should have reminded him of the contract, the cameras, the illusion they were meant to uphold. But instead, his hands fisted in Adrian's shirt, pulling him closer, kissing him back with equal fire. And when they broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together, Ethan realized with a mix of terror and relief that there was no turning back. That night, Ethan didn't sleep on his side of the bed. He didn't sleep at all. Adrian's arms around him felt too real, too right, too dangerous. Because if this was only supposed to be business, then why did it feel like home? The morning after their kiss, Ethan woke with sunlight bleeding through the curtains and Adrian's arm draped over his waist. For a brief second, it felt real. Like the contract, the business, the cameras, all of it didn't exist. Like he was simply a man waking in the arms of someone who wanted him. But then Adrian stirred, muttered something under his breath, and pulled away. The warmth vanished. Ethan lay still, his chest aching with something he couldn't name. The night before had been fire and surrender, yes, but what did it mean? Was it weakness, a lapse in control, or something more? By the time he got up, Adrian was already in the kitchen, dressed, tie knotted, coffee in hand like nothing had happened. Morning, Adrian said, not looking at him. Ethan swallowed. Morning. Neither spoke of the kiss. Neither spoke of the fire. And in the silence, Ethan felt the weight of a truth he couldn't escape. Last night had changed everything. The weeks that followed were torture. They fell into a rhythm that oscillated between unbearable closeness and suffocating distance. Some nights, they sat on the same couch, Ethan curled against Adrian's shoulder as they watched the city below. Other nights, Adrian worked late, retreating into walls Ethan couldn't breach. And when they touched God, when they touched it was a battlefield. Adrian's hands were steady, commanding, but always hesitant at the edges, as though he was holding back. Ethan's heart hammered every time, caught between wanting more and fearing what more might cost. It was a fragile balance, and it couldn't last. The first crack came at a Hale Enterprises board meeting. Ethan hadn't planned to attend. He hated those meetings, the endless posturing, the subtle digs, the way Adrian had to armor himself just to keep his place at the table. But Adrian had asked him to come, his voice unusually tight, and Ethan couldn't say no. The room was filled with sharks in tailored suits, each waiting for the slightest drop of blood. Adrian sat at the head, calm and immovable, Ethan at his side, the perfect picture of a supportive spouse. And then a man in his 50s, slick-haired and smug, leaned forward with a thin smile. Adrian, we've all made sacrifices for the company. But dragging this young man into a marriage contract just to protect your seat? That's desperate, even for you. The words hit like a blade. Ethan froze, the blood rushing from his face. He glanced at Adrian, waiting for denial, for fury, for anything. But Adrian didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, yes, but he said nothing. Nothing. The silence screamed louder than any confirmation. Ethan's chest constricted. He sat there, pretending, smiling stiffly, while inside, something cracked so loudly he was sure the whole boardroom heard it. That night, Ethan didn't go home. He walked the streets of Manhattan until his feet ached, until the noise of traffic drowned out the storm in his chest. Adrian's silence at that table had been a betrayal. Not because it wasn't true they both knew what this marriage had started as, but because Adrian hadn't defended him, hadn't even tried. By the time he returned to the penthouse, the city lights had dimmed. Adrian was waiting, pacing, his tie loosened, his expression thunderous. Where the hell were you? Ethan dropped his keys on the counter. Out. Out. Adrian's voice rose. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is for you to disappear like that? Ethan spun on him, fury and heartbreak spilling over. Dangerous? You sat there today and let them tear me apart like I was nothing. Like I was just another pawn in your goddamn empire. And now you care about my safety. Adrian's eyes burned. I didn't deny it because it's the truth. The words were a gunshot. Ethan staggered back, shaking his head. You bastard. Ethan, no, his voice broke. Don't you dare say my name like that. Not after everything. Not after last night. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian's face was a mask of control, but his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. Finally, Adrian whispered, almost broken. I didn't deny it because I thought you didn't want me to. I thought you didn't want me to admit what this is becoming. The confession sliced through the rage, but Ethan was too raw to hear it. Too shattered. He shoved past Adrian, retreating to the guest room, slamming the door with a finality that echoed through the hollow penthouse. For days, they avoided each other. Ethan buried himself in work, staying late at the firm, pretending exhaustion was the reason for his distance. Adrian threw himself deeper into Hale Enterprises, his temper sharper than ever, his smiles colder. But the silence was unbearable, because even when Ethan shut him out, he felt Adrian's presence everywhere, the half-empty coffee mug in the sink, the jacket draped over the chair, the faint trace of cologne that lingered in the hall. And every night, as Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, he wondered, had Adrian wanted to defend him? Had he wanted to claim him not as a pawn, not as a contract, but as something real? The doubt was a poison. It all came to a head one night when Ethan returned home late, rain dripping from his coat. He found Adrian on the rooftop, standing against the skyline, a glass of scotch in his hand, his hair damp from the storm. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, but then Adrian spoke without turning. "You think I don't care?" Ethan froze. "What?" Adrian turned, rain streaking down his face, though his eyes were sharper than ever. "You think I don't care about you, that this marriage is still just paper to me. But you're wrong." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you say anything that day? Why did you let them humiliate me?" Adrian's jaw worked, his grip on the glass tightening. "Because admitting it in there means they'll use you against me. Against us. And I can't." His voice broke. For the first time, Adrian Hale's untouchable air sounded human. "I can't lose you." The words hung heavy, almost drowned by the rain. Ethan's chest ached, torn between anger and longing. "You can't say that now. Not after everything. Not after the way you've treated me." Adrian closed the distance in 2 strides, gripping Ethan's wrist, his eyes blazing. "You think I don't know I've ruined this? That I've made a mess of us? But I swear to you, Ethan, the one thing that's not a lie, not a performance, is what I feel when I look at you." Ethan's breath hitched, his body trembling under Adrian's grip. "Say it," he whispered, tears threatening. "If you mean it, then say it." Adrian's hand slid to his face, cupping it with a gentleness that broke him. His forehead pressed to Ethan's, his voice raw. "I'm in love with you." The words were lightning terrifying, electrifying, impossible to ignore. Ethan's tears spilled, mingling with the rain. For a moment, the world disappeared, leaving only the thunder of their hearts. And then, without thinking, Ethan kissed him soft at first. Then, with the desperation of a man who'd been drowning and finally found air. The city roared around them, but all Ethan felt was Adrian's lips, Adrian's hands, Adrian's whispered apologies against his skin. For the first time, the contract felt like nothing, and the love felt like everything. The weeks after that storm-soaked rooftop confession were the most difficult of their marriage. Adrian's words, "I am in love with you," echoed through Ethan's mind like a haunting refrain. He wanted to believe them, wanted to let them stitch over the fractures in his heart. But love was not enough to erase the damage. Not when Adrian's empire, his family, and the contract that had brought them together loomed like shadows over every tender moment. And those shadows grew darker. The Hale empire was in chaos. Adrian's uncle, Victor, had been quietly maneuvering behind the scenes, sowing doubt among board members, whispering poison about Adrian's marriage. Their union, once a clever strategy, was now ammunition in Victor's war to seize control. "You've made yourself weak," Victor sneered during a tense confrontation in the boardroom, his gaze flicking to Ethan like a dagger. "Love is liability, and liabilities don't survive long in this family." The words chilled Ethan to his bones, not just because of the threat they carried, but because, for the first time, he realized the cost of loving Adrian might not only be heartbreak, it could be survival. That night, Ethan found Adrian in his office, staring at the city lights, his reflection fractured across the glass. "They'll come after you," Adrian said quietly, without turning. "They'll use you against me. I should have never dragged you into this." Ethan's voice trembled, but it was steady enough. "You didn't drag me. I signed that contract. I chose this." Adrian finally turned, his eyes burning with something raw. "But you didn't choose me." "Not really." Silence. The kind that hurt. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Maybe I didn't at first, but I do now." Adrian blinked, as if the words were impossible to believe. And Ethan, terrified but resolute, cupped his face, forcing him to see the truth. "I don't care about the company. I don't care about your father's empire. I care about you, even when it terrifies me." For the first time, Adrian's mask shattered completely. His hands shook as they gripped Ethan's, his forehead pressing to Ethan's like a man who had been fighting too long alone. "I don't deserve you," Adrian whispered. Ethan's lips brushed against his in answer, soft and unyielding. "Maybe not. But you have me anyway." The war inside Hale Enterprises reached its climax weeks later. Victor made his move, launching a coup during a shareholder meeting, presenting falsified evidence of Adrian's reckless behavior. It was brutal, surgical, meant to strip Adrian of his authority and his legacy in one decisive blow. But Adrian was not alone this time. Ethan stood at his side, not as a pawn, not as a contract spouse, but as a partner. He spoke with fire in his voice, tearing through Victor's lies with the precision of a lawyer who had nothing left to lose. Every word was a gamble, every glance at Adrian a promise. "We're in this together." And when the final vote came, Adrian prevailed. Barely, but enough. Victor was forced out, his empire crumbling. Adrian, bloodied but not broken, walked out of that boardroom with Ethan's hand in his, not caring who saw. Afterward, when the adrenaline faded, when the city outside was quieter than it had ever been, Ethan and Adrian returned to the penthouse. The silence was thick, but not like before. This silence was full of everything they had survived, everything they had lost, and everything they had found in each other. Adrian poured a drink but set it aside untouched. He stood at the window, the city sprawling beneath him, and said, "It's over, for now." Ethan moved behind him, wrapping his arms around Adrian's waist, resting his cheek against his back. "No, it's just beginning." Adrian turned, his expression raw, stripped of every mask. "Ethan, you could still walk away. The contract is void now. You don't owe me anything." Ethan laughed softly, the sound cracked but real. "You idiot. Do you still not get it? I stayed because I wanted to. I love you, contract or not." For once, Adrian had no clever words, no armor. Only tears, unfamiliar, unwanted, but real, burning at the corners of his eyes. He kissed Ethan like it was the first and last time, like the world had ended and begun in the same breath. And Ethan kissed him back, not because he was bound, but because he was free. Months later, their marriage no longer lived in tabloids or boardroom whispers. It lived in Sunday mornings tangled in sheets, in quiet dinners where Adrian burned the pasta and Ethan laughed until his sides hurt, in the way they fought and forgave, broke and rebuilt. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Manhattan, Adrian came home late to find Ethan asleep on the couch, law books scattered around him. Adrian stood for a long moment just watching, his chest aching with something he no longer feared naming. He knelt, brushing a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead, and whispered the words that had once been a promise, a warning, a shield. "Don't tremble. I'll be gentle." But this time they weren't about control or contracts. They were about love, about forever. Ethan stirred, blinking awake, his lips curving into a sleepy smile. "You're late." Adrian smiled back, softer than the city had ever seen him. "I'm home." And in that simple truth, in that fragile, beautiful, ordinary moment, they both knew. This was no longer a marriage of convenience. It was a love story, one born in fire, healed in rain, and built to last. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.